2,500 years ago, ancient Athens not only grew to be the biggest city in the Greek world, but also to be by far the most complex Greek city, in many respects, politically speaking, but also culturally, socially, geographically too. Surrounded by mountains, Athens was rich in water, arable land, and other important resources. And all of this just a few miles from the sea. It was also a well-structured city-state, namely a political entity, with a vast countryside expanding near the mountains and beyond, with an urban center, the polis, the city proper, and with an acropolis, a citadel at its very heart. This acropolis, the most iconic image of the ancient world, it's a place of history proper, archaeology, extraordinary art, and myth. There is a number of foundation myths of Athens, but the most important, and surely the most famous, is the one representing Athena and Poseidon as engaging in a rather bizarre and perhaps unfair contest for the city itself. To recall this story, we have to go back to this once upon a time period, the very remote mythical and heroic past, the Age of Kingdoms, when Athens was ruled by a king called Kekrops, who at some point set out to find a patron deity for his kingdom. Now here things are not very clear, as it is in all myths actually. So the king approached both Athena and Poseidon, I guess because both were extremely powerful, or maybe they approached him for saying the greatness of the city. The point is that both gods had to present themselves in front of the king and offer a gift to the city, something of value. And they, the king and his people, or the king alone, or just the people, would be the ones to judge which offering was the best, thereby choosing their city's patron god. Poseidon, the god of the sea, went first. He raised his trident and struck the rock of the Acropolis, and from the rocky ground a spring of salty water came forth. This symbolizes the city's position near the sea, the root of his power and trade and war. On the other hand, Athena was known as the goddess of wisdom and of war, actually of intelligence and of the civilized warfare, and also of the agriculture and of many other things. She was also the patroness of handicrafts and of weaving and spinning, and of the virtues of justice and skill. On her turn, Athena struck her spear nearly in the same spot, creating an olive tree. This one now standing for the agricultural wealth of the Athenian land, the very base of city's economic success. So, it's not a surprise to hear that the King Kekrops and his people went for Athena, wisely indeed, and the city was named after her. The goddess and the city became closely connected. As a matter of fact, the hill I'm now standing was also mythologically credited to Athena. It's the famous Lycabettus, the highest hill of the city, and it was created when Athena dropped a limestone rock on her way to the Acropolis. Athena and her symbols were also depicted on the city's silver coin, like this small replica that I'm holding here. The obverse shows the head of the goddess in helmet and adorned with an olive wreath. The reverse depicts the little owl, the creature that symbolizes wisdom and is linked to Athena, with an extra olive spring at the top right. This is a very typical Greek thing, since all the independent city-states issue their own coins depicting their own symbols and deities on them. As for example, this coin from Naxos, an island state in central Aegean, where the patron god Dionysus, or Dionysos, god of wine, ecstasy and theatre later, is depicted on the obverse, while on the back his good companion and assistant, Selinus. The other very typical thing the Greeks did was to celebrate and worship their gods collectively in their cities. So did the Athenians, but in a spectacular and extravagant way by organizing a massive civic festival in Athena's honor. However, these stories are never that simple. When it comes to mythology, politics, religion, society, money, economy, and so on, the closer you look, the more complex it gets. It was in their heyday, the classical era, around 450–440 BC, that the Athenians began to celebrate the divine contest, namely, the debate between the two gods, the victory of Athena, and also, quite notably, Poseidon himself. The struggle between the two gods, Athena and Poseidon, was actually chosen to be depicted on the top of the west facade of the Parthenon, the huge temple dedicated to Athena that crowned the Acropolis. Few meters away, at the north side of the rock, a new temple, odd in shape, stood on the city's most sacred and mythical ground, the very spot where the gods had fought. Somehow, both gifts, tree and sea, were on display there, and both deities were worshipped in this temple. A unique cohabitation. The Athenian myth is exceptionally ingenious, as it points out the city's natural advantages and its potential for hegemony, ascribing it to the wisdom of the Athenians themselves. After all, once a gift is offered, it cannot be taken back. And as we saw, both deities had contributed to the city's success. Throughout a long and dramatic history, Athens experienced countless changes. Rulers, religions, cultures, contexts shifted and changed. But the city's name never did. To this day, the identity of Athena, its patron, echoes every time the name is spoken. The image of hand and symbols are still present all over the city, from 19th century neoclassicism to 60s modernity, pop art, and to the more recent local enterprises. So, as you see, the story begins here, and here it continues,